You're listening to the Balanced Educator Podcast, episode number 157. Welcome to the Balanced Educator. We're your hosts, Kaylee
and Josiane from EduCalm. Our intention is to equip and empower you to feel more calm, balanced, and joyful in all aspects of your life.
Hello there and welcome. We are so happy to have you here with us today. So, alarming statistic, 60% of teen girls and 40% of teen boys on Instagram experience negative social comparison. And there's a lot more negative statistics related to social media that we're going to share in this episode. But in this episode of the Balanced Educator Podcast, we've invited Richard Capriola to talk about how social media is affecting teen mental health. You'll learn some shocking statistics on how teen mental health is evolving in the recent years and related to the pandemic as well. But more importantly, you're going to learn strategies you can use in the classroom to support your students in this complex social media and pandemic era. Before we get into the interview, we're excited to share this week's sponsor. Do you want to incorporate social emotional learning and mindfulness into your classroom to support students with mental health, focus, self-regulation, and emotional intelligence? With so much on your plate as a teacher, you probably just don't have time to get trained, develop resources, and teach the lessons yourself. Plus, you need time for self-care too. That's why we developed EduCalm, to support teachers like you. EduCalm is a fully bilingual English and French co-regulation program created by teachers. This program provides everything you'll need to build self-regulation, mindfulness, and social-emotional skills with your students through a 5-minute daily practice. With EduCalm, you don't have to be the expert. Just log in, press play, and participate with your students as you all prepare your minds and bodies for calm and focused teaching and learning together. Go to educalm.com to learn more and start using our free resources. Again, that's educalm.com, spelled EduCalme. Hello there, Richard. Thank you so much for joining us again on the podcast.
Hi, Kaylee. It's a pleasure to be back with you. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Well, we really loved having you on for episode 151, where we talked about what teachers need to know about adolescent substance abuse. If our listeners have not listened to that episode yet, you definitely need to go back, take a listen. It was super informative, super interesting, and an important topic for teachers to know if they are working with teens. Now, we wanted to dive into some more topics around teens together, but didn't have enough time in that first episode. So today we're going to kind of go in a slightly different direction that I'm really excited to chat about. So before we get started, can you just introduce yourself to our audience in case they didn't hear your episode with us the first time around?
Yeah, thank you. I have over 2 decades of experience working with teenagers and adults diagnosed with mental health and substance abuse issues. I worked for over a decade at Menninger Clinic in Houston, Texas, which is a large psychiatric hospital treating both adults and adolescents. And after I retired from there, I wrote my book, The Addicted Child, A Parent's Guide to Adolescent Substance Abuse. And I encourage people to listen to the interview that we had back a while ago, just to get a basic understanding of what's going on with adolescent substance abuse. I have posted on the website a blog article which has some very important information about how the pandemic has affected teen substance abuse. So anybody who's interested in reading about how the pandemic has changed teen drug use, I would encourage you to go to the website, look at the article. The website is helptheaddictedchild.com, and you'll see the blog article posted there. The pandemic has had a tremendous impact on teen substance use.
Yeah, that is super obvious to us in the classroom,
Yeah.
in terms of we're seeing a shift in our students' behaviors, in their mental health, in their well-being. So it makes total sense that it's translating to addictions and what are kids doing with this time that they have alone? How are they coping
Yeah.
with these challenges that they're facing? So
Yeah.
I will link to that blog post in our show notes. So for those listening, I'll let you know at the end of the episode where you can find the links to everything that we mention in this episode.
Great.
So,
Great.
yeah, and your book is super helpful. It's to the point, really useful for teachers because we don't have a lot of time on our hands. So it's so nice to get like a short and concise, to the point information that we can kind of act on right away. So your book is great for that. So thank you for putting that into the world.
That's good to hear, because I know that teachers are very busy. They're overwhelmed, just like parents. They don't have time to read volumes of information on this. So I tried to keep it at around 100 pages, but pack into it a lot of information that I hope readers will find useful and informative.
Yeah, and you did a great job at that. So let's get into today's topic, which
Yeah.
is related, and that's how has teen mental health changed? How is it evolving? I think us teachers in the classroom, we're seeing things change, but I'd love to know from your expert point of view, what are the statistics showing? What are the research showing? And what are professionals in the field seeing?
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. I think teachers are sort of on the front line, so to speak, of these issues, whether it's adolescent substance abuse or mental health issues or behavioral issues or personality disorder issues. Those filter right into the classroom. So one of the challenges that today's teachers have is how do you deal with all of that on top of the academic stuff that you're responsible for? And it can get a bit overwhelming. But even before we got into this pandemic, there was an alarming mental health crisis among our youth. For example, from the period of 2009 to 2019, just before the pandemic, there had been about a 40% increase in high school students reporting feelings of sadness and hopelessness, and about a 36% increase in teenagers seriously considering suicide. So even before we got into the pandemic, we had been experiencing a mental health crisis. Then the pandemic comes along. Well, what does that do? Teens are faced with unprecedented challenges. It changed their lives, and it changed the lives of their families. It changed the lives of school teachers and counselors. Children were removed from their classrooms. They went to online learning. They were removed from their friends and their social and athletic activities. And many were isolated at home, and some were struggling with online classes and activities. And then also the interaction with their peers was pretty much limited to social media. So there was an increase in social media. So during the pandemic, what we saw was, an increase in depression, anxiety. It doubled among teenagers during the pandemic at the early stages of it. In early 2021, when we were getting into the pandemic, emergency room visits for suspected suicide were 51% higher for girls and 4% higher for boys. So, that's just one indicator of how dramatic this was. And students in grades 8 and 10 and 12, middle school, high school, many were reporting increases in problems with their mental health, feelings like increased anxiety, in intense anger, feeling annoyed. They also reported feeling bored and sad and lonely. And many reported problems with worrying and sleep problems. And these were reported in, all three grades of 8, 10, and 12. So this pandemic had disrupted families, it disrupted adults, but it had a real severe impact on adolescents. And I think we're just beginning to scratch the surface on that and see how dramatic it was on teenagers' mental health.
Yeah, hearing all those statistics as a teacher, what I'm kind of where my mind is going is like, oh my gosh, that's shocking. And also, I'm not shocked because I'm seeing this in the classroom. I'm seeing
Yeah.
this in my students. And it's almost, for me, I'm feeling almost a sense of like, okay, I'm not imagining this. Like, it's not just the fact that I'm more overwhelmed because of all the things that are going on, that these problems seem to have grown. It's actually happening and it's widespread. And I'm sure we're seeing these types of statistics all over the place. And as you mentioned, in multiple age ranges, from middle school all the way to grade 12. And probably if there was statistics on young adults and university level, it's probably the same thing. And so then it's like, okay, this is a real problem. Now what? So what do we do as teachers to kind of come up against these problems and give our students the tools that they need? Because as teachers, it's really hard to teach when our students are feeling stressed, when they're anxious, when they're depressed, when they're sad, when they're feeling detached and disconnected. And, if we just try to power through with academics, we don't get very far because there's a wall up, emotionally and mentally. They're not ready for the academics. So what should us teachers be doing?
Well, I think also there's a dimension to this mental health as kids transition back into the regular school system too this year. Some children will struggle with reintegrating back into the regular classroom, particularly kids that might have social anxiety, or some type of learning difficulty. As they transition back into the school, that can be a challenge for them as well. So we need to be aware of that and sensitive to that. What I would say to teachers is the same thing that I would say to families on what can you do. First, be a good role model. By taking care of your own mental health and physical health. Teachers are under tremendous amount of pressure. They've got to deal not only with the academic responsibilities, but all of these changes in the classroom as a result of the pandemic, whether it's wearing masks or different hours and things like that. So it's important for teachers and family members to take good care of their own mental health and physical health. Number two, help children to develop strong, safe, and stable relationships. Encourage those relationships. Develop them with your students. Many teachers already do this anyway, because research shows that the most important thing a child needs is a stable, committed relationship with a supportive adult. And sometimes that supportive adult, the most supportive adult, is the classroom teacher. That's sort of sad in some respects, but at least there is that opportunity for the classroom teacher to develop that relationship with that child child may not have anywhere else. And that can make a tremendous difference in that child's life. Then encourage children to build healthy social relationships with their peers and try to help them understand what a healthy relationship is with other students and peers. And parents, be attentive to how children spend their time online. We're going to talk about social media here in a little while, but pay attention to how children are dealing with social media. What are they doing? How much time are they spending on it? Who are they interacting with? I have on my website a blog article that talks about teen mental health, and it also has some questions to ask, sort of as a check-in. These come from Newport Academy, which is a very outstanding treatment center for adolescents. I referred adolescents to Newport Academy many times. And so I have a series, I think, of about 10 questions from Newport Academy that parents and teachers can use. For example, one of them is, what 3 words best describe how you're feeling right now? So you can ask your student if you have a concern, what 3 words best describe how you're feeling right now? Another one would be, on a scale of 1 to 10, going from negative to positive, what number describes your state of mind? And another one would be, fill in the blank. Something I've been thinking about a lot lately is. And one other one is, if your feelings were weather, what kind of a day would it be outside? So those are some of the questions. There's other questions on the website, on the blog article, but those are quick questions that a teacher can use to sort of check in on the mental health of a student. They're not scientific, they're not drawn out. They're rather quick questions, like, on a scale of 1 to 10, what's your state of mind? What's something you've been thinking a lot about lately? And if you were weather, what kind of a day would it be? They may tell you it's a sunny day. They may tell you it's a dark, gloomy day. It's raining, it's thundering. And that'll give you some insight maybe into how they're feeling at that moment.
Yeah, those types of questions are great ways to start class or end class. Like check-ins, not just on how are things going academically with our students, but checking in on them emotionally. That can be something as a teacher that you put up on the board, and maybe you're using a tool, now I can't think of the one where it's like an online tool where people can anonymously post. So you can ask a question and then all the kids in your class can answer the question, and it goes up onto this website kind of board. I think it's a Google thing. I'll find what I'm referring to, and I'll link in the show notes.
Okay, good.
It's useful, but basically it's an anonymous way for the class to share their responses. And then as a teacher, you get that moment to be like, oh, wow, lots of kids in the class are struggling today. Well, there's no point powering through. Let's take 5 minutes to do a mindfulness practice, or let's take 5 minutes to just chat. How about I just give them, maybe they're feeling disconnected today. Maybe I give them 5 minutes to just chat with the person next to them so they can create that connection. It gives such great feedback, and it doesn't have to be complicated. You can even be repeating these questions that you're suggesting, have them kind of on a loop every day. You ask a different, a Monday through Friday, you've got 5 different questions that you cycle through as part of your routine at the start of class. That can be a great check-in. And not only for you as the teacher, but I think it can be really helpful for the students to learn compassion by seeing what other people are sharing. So, for that student that is just naturally a more positive kid and doesn't realize that like other kids are struggling, for them to see, oh, wow, there's a bunch of people in class that are struggling emotionally. It opens their eyes to the fact that everyone is coming from a different starting point in class. We're not all at the same emotional level. And then, is there something that I can do as their peer, as their friend? I probably don't know who it was that said that thing, but just being open to the possibility of being an emotional support to a peer. I think that can be a great way to kind of open everyone's eyes in the classroom and develop that emotional intelligence.
Yeah, I think you bring up an excellent point in that you can use this as an exercise for other children to learn empathy and to learn how to deal with different emotions that they see. It can be used as a tool to help an individual child, but it can also be an exercise where other children are seeing, learning how to deal with other people's emotions and how important those emotions are. So there's different, teachers are very creative. They'll come up with unique ways of being able to use these questions or questions maybe that they have on their own. The important thing is it is something that families can do and teachers can do to check in with kids to see how they're feeling, to see what's going on in their lives, because teachers know that what's going on in a child's life is going to affect their academic performance. So let's check in with them. Let's see what we can do to find out what's going on and help them. Yeah, I think teachers would be a great resource for that.
Awesome. Yeah, those questions are good ideas. And as you said, it can be a one-on-one thing too. Like if you have a kid that you're really noticing in class seems really off today, you
Yeah,
can ask them one of those questions. Because often if we ask anyone, if we say, "How are you?" the automatic response is to be like, "Oh, fine," or "I'm
fine.
good."
I'm okay.
It's hard to get to the actual a real response to how they're feeling by
Yeah,
asking a simple question like that. So these suggestions that you gave are a way that really actually makes them think about it and
right.
gives them options for how to vocalize. Maybe they don't know how to exactly name the emotion that they're feeling, but if we're
Yeah.
putting it on a scale, well, that can be good. Another thing that I liked to do is ask my students to tell me in emojis how
Hmm.
they were feeling. So, and I would use that a lot. That was kind of our routine when we were doing remote learning. And, who knows when remote learning is going to necessarily end? It might be something that just keeps coming back for a while. And also,
Yeah.
lots of schools are starting to recognize that, as you said, some students actually are really thriving in the remote learning
Hmm.
environment. So, a lot of schools are starting to offer more online courses as an option for those types of kids.
Yeah.
So, as a teacher that's teaching in a remote classroom, it can be hard to sort of like make those connections and create community as a classroom. So asking these types of questions at the beginning of your meeting online together is a great way
Yeah.
to create those connections that is a lot harder to do when you're not actually seeing their body language. So
Right.
emojis can be a good way for them to kind of articulate how they're feeling if they don't have the words for it.
Hmm. And you're right. If you ask a kid how they're feeling today, you're going to get a one word answer. Okay, fine, great. But going into these questions allows the child to respond in a little bit more, in a better way that might get you some more information. So those are some examples of questions. There's more on the website. So if you want to know what all 10 of the questions are, just go to the website and read the blog article on teen. There's a separate article just on this. So,
Perfect.
but
And I'll link that in the show notes as well.
okay, great.
Awesome. So that is a really helpful list. As teachers, we're always trying to figure out how we can better serve our students, and mental health really is top of mind during these
Yeah.
times. And as you said, the statistics are showing that things are changing. So as teachers, whether we we like it or not, mental health really has to become our top priority for what we're focusing on before we can get into those academics. So
Yeah, teachers are in the middle of it. Really, they're,
mhm.
they're they're in the middle of it, day in, day out. They are responsible for not just the academic components, which can be overwhelming, but also now, to deal with these pandemic mental health issues that are coming right into the classroom. And
Mhm.
you as teachers see it more than maybe even the parents do, because you deal with it every single day, and you see these kids in a different environment and a different light than what parents do. And many times a teacher will be the first one to pick up on something that just doesn't seem right. So
Mhm.
yeah, it's a challenge, but it's also an opportunity to really help these kids.
Yeah. Now, one thing that you mentioned too was how we kind of have to model positive mental health behaviors
Yeah.
to the kids in our lives, or to our students, to our children. And that can be tough when us as adults might not necessarily have the tools, or we're just feeling overwhelmed. And then kind of that added pressure of like, well, we have to make it look like everything's okay when we're in front of 25 teens,
Yeah.
So, how would you recommend for adults to kind of open, or kind of open the curtain to and be vulnerable with the kids in our lives, where we're not putting our problems on them, but we're
Hmm.
showing them that it's normal to struggle,
Yeah.
and then kind of like working through what are some solutions, like what are some strategies we can use? Do you have any suggestions for how to do that?
Well,
The
I
kids.
think it depends on what you're seeing in the child. For example, if you see a child that's feeling very anxious or very nervous, you can talk to them about a time when you felt that same way and how you dealt with it. Maybe you used slow breathing exercises, maybe you used exercise, but you can sort of tune into that child's anxiety and explain to them, that having anxiety in certain situations is very normal, that you've had it yourself, and this is some of the things that you have found helpful. So it's almost like taking some of your own experiences with what the child is dealing with and seeing if in an appropriate way you can share with them so that they see that, oh, you've had this too, and then give them some suggestions on things that have worked for you.
Yeah, that's a really good recommendation.
And I think you can
So,
reinforce the idea that, good mental health relies upon good nutrition, good exercise, good activities. And you can talk about maybe if some of those activities that you have done or some of the things that you have done to maintain feeling better too. Those are just examples on how we can share with somebody what has helped us.
yeah, that's awesome. That's a great recommendation. So now let's start talking about, we said we're talking about how mental health is changing for teens these days. Now, a big influence on our teens' mental health and just their daily activities and what they get exposed to is social media. So let's get
Yes.
into that.
Okay, social media. That's a one that I think is very important. I think parents and teachers are well aware of how important social media is to kids. Roughly 22 million teens are on Instagram. Instagram is owned by Facebook. Another 5 million teens are on Facebook. So Instagram is much more popular than Facebook. But what we're seeing is TikTok is now becoming a tremendous influence on kids. TikTok has actually become more popular than Instagram. 67% of teenagers use TikTok on a weekly basis. I have a granddaughter that uses TikTok, so TikTok, Facebook, and Instagram. Those are just three. There's others, but teenagers particularly, are attracted to TikTok and Instagram. Facebook did some research on this, which became public not too long ago, and interestingly, it found that teenagers know that these applications are addictive. They even say that they have a desire to spend less time on them, but then they say they just don't have enough self-control to change their scrolling, to change their behavior. So they know it's addictive. They know they're spending too much time on it. They want to spend less time, but they say, but I just can't do it. Now, some of the alarming statistics that came out of the Facebook study was 60% of girls and 40% of boys experience negative social comparisons. They see other people on the social media and they compare themselves to it and they look at themselves negatively. About 30 to 35% of girls feel pressure to look perfect in their posts. 33% of girls say that the content that they see on these social media apps makes them feel worse about themselves. So they're comparing themselves. And 50% of kids using these social media report feelings of being unattractive, and said that the feelings that they're having actually started from Instagram. And 14% of boys said Instagram made them feel worse about themselves. So the bottom line is kids are using social media. They're using apps like Instagram and TikTok, and they're walking away with, particularly for girls, they're walking away with a negative self-image. They're comparing themselves to images that they see, and they see themselves as less attractive, and it's creating a negative impression among these teenage girls. And for teenagers who are already struggling with some type of mental health issue, the social media may actually make those feelings of anxiety or depression or self-worth even worse. So teachers, parents need to be aware of how extensive teenagers are on social media and how it is negatively affecting so many teenagers, especially young girls, in their self-image, and how it's tearing it down. And many of these teenagers do not recognize that the images that they're seeing on social media are not necessarily accurate. They're made up images, but yet they're comparing themselves to them. So a young girl looks at these images and she sees an image and she compares herself to it, and she begins to feel like she's less than what she wants to be. So because of the extensive use of social media, this is something parents need to get on top of and teachers need to be aware of. So when we look at, well, what can parents do? Okay, what can parents do? Mayo Clinic issued a set of recommendations, and some of them are set reasonable limits. Talk to your child about how to avoid social media interfering with activities, and these are guidelines that teachers can use too. Maybe have a discussion or a group discussion on social media with a group of teenagers. But set reasonable limits. Talk to children about how to avoid social interaction interfering with their activities. So you could have a group discussion and you could talk about how social media is interfering with your activities, and sort of have a group of students sit around and talk about that.
Yeah. And I think it's really important for us teachers to actually give students the floor to talk about these things. Because oftentimes when we ask them these questions, their responses surprise us. We think we get it. But oftentimes we don't. I think for myself, because I've always worked with teenagers, or not always, but for the most part, I've taught at the teenage level. And so, I started working at a high school when I was in university. So I was still almost a teenager and I was already working with teenagers. So I think my mindset is like, I get teenagers, like I know what's going on in their mind. But then oftentimes when we have these types of discussions, they'll say things that I'm like, oh, okay, I thought I knew, but I didn't. Like it's so important to listen to their voice and how they articulate it. And then I think it's also really important to talk about strategies together, because these apps are so addictive. And as the research showed, not only are they addictive, but the students recognize they're addictive and can't change their behaviors, can't figure out a way to reduce their social media use, even though they know that it's detrimental. They know it's having a negative impact. So that kind of tells me that if they know there's a problem and they can't figure out how to solve it, it's not that there's anything wrong with them. It's that they need to learn new strategies. So I think talking about that is so important. And, in the classroom, you see kids that are so addicted to their social media that they literally can't keep their phone in their pocket or in their bag during class. It's a compulsive behavior to pull it out.
And if you see a student that is struggling academically, one of the things that I would check on is their cell phone use. For example, are they on their cell phone late at night? Is it interrupting their sleeping? Are they neglecting their schoolwork? Because one of the things I suggest to parents is encourage a bedtime and a sleep routine, and keep cell phones and tablets out of the teens' bedrooms. You'd be surprised of the number of parents that I see on these teen parent websites who talk about their kids being up until 2 and 3 o'clock in the morning, and they come into their room and they're on their cell phone. So as a teacher, if you see a kid struggling academically, check in to see about their cell phone use. Maybe they're staying up till 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning on their cell phone, and they're coming into the classroom and they're just not able to be with it. But
Yeah. That's actually something that I've heard my students articulating more and more, especially since the pandemic. I think that with the pandemic, everyone in families is kind of finding their own way to deal with the boredom, or, like kind of everyone's probably doing their own thing. And so maybe rules became a bit more relaxed, and more I'm hearing of kids up till 5 a.m. because they were on TikTok, and TikTok is so addictive. Teachers, if you have not been on TikTok, I think it's really important that you go on TikTok just so you understand what your students are dealing with, because it is insanely addictive. You get on there and then all of a sudden an hour's gone by and you're like, what just happened? It's just, and it's like, there's these hilarious videos. Like, it's fun being on there for a while. I mean, I can watch an hour of dog videos, but if I don't actually set some sort of, like, I need to have strategies to make sure I don't get stuck on there, because time goes by and you just don't recognize how much time is going by. So for kids that aren't like, well, I don't want to be on my phone all day, like, as an adult, you kind of have these limits ingrained in you that you're not going to be on your phone forever. So you got to stop at some point, but you can lose track of time. So for kids, it'd be so much more. So, suggesting something like having an alarm or a clock, like, okay, I'm going on TikTok right now, only for 30 minutes. I'm going to set a timer on my phone for 30 minutes. And once the 30 minutes is up, I'm done. Or, as you said, bringing phones into the bedroom is really disruptive to kids' sleep cycles. And, if parents and teachers can really recommend strongly to not bring phones into the bedroom, because it's just too easy to, if you're having a hard time falling asleep, well, I'm bored, I'll go on TikTok. And then that's not going to help the situation.
Yeah. And I think it's a good opportunity for teachers to have discussions, maybe a group discussion with their pupils about social media, and have kids share how they're using social media. That leads into, well, how much time are you on social media, and have them sort of talk about their habits of using social media. And I wouldn't be surprised if many of them admit that, yeah, I'm on it way too much, but I can't pull away from it. And then you can talk about, well, how can we all work together to spend less time on it. And I think also a good discussion is, what's appropriate and inappropriate behavior. We want to discourage gossiping. We want to discourage spreading rumors or bullying or damaging someone's reputation. And you may have kids who speak up and say, yeah, I've seen that happen. I've seen it happen to friends. I know it happens. So talk about, what is appropriate and safe on social media. You could have that discussion with a group of students or one-on-one. And that leads to encouraging and talking about, well, how can we have more face-to-face contact with friends, especially for teens that are vulnerable to social problems. And I think also remind them that social media is full of unrealistic images, that a lot of what they see on social media that they compare themselves to is not real. And you could have some kids, talk about how they see that too, because so many kids, especially girls, are comparing themselves to these images that they see on social media. And I think one thing that teachers can do and parents can do is have more discussions about social media. What's going on with social media? How are you using social media? How is it affecting you? And begin to have those discussions.
Yeah, such important discussions to have. And there's a documentary on Netflix that's super good, that if as a teacher you haven't watched it, and if your students haven't watched it, you should recommend it. And of course, now I'm having a trouble with names today. I can't remember the name of it, but I will link it in the show notes, and I'll mention it after in the outro of this episode, so I can mention it, because I can't remember what it's called. It's been a while since I've seen it, but I think it's really important. it explains, how these algorithms work, how the
Yeah.
apps are deciding what to show you next. And I think that's very important to understand. And even from, an social equity standpoint, for kids to understand that the things that they're being shown isn't necessarily a real reflection of the world,
Yeah.
and that we really have to curate what we are being shown on these apps, because it's going to show us what it thinks we want to see based on our likes and our interactions.
Right.
So, we can adjust the types of things that it shows us as well, by adjusting how we interact with the app and who we choose to follow. And, if there's people that we're following that make us feel bad about ourselves, unfollow them. You don't need that in your life. If you're
Right.
going
Right.
onto the app and coming off feeling bad about yourself, you do have control over that. You can choose to follow different people
Right.
that leave you feeling good about yourself when you come off the app.
Right. Right. Yeah. And it's important to recognize that distinction and know that you do have control over that. But with this being so widespread among teenagers, I think it's an issue that parents need to be aware of, if, to talk to their kids about. If necessary, use parental controls so that you can shut this stuff down, say at midnight or 11 p.m. or whatever is appropriate. There are things that parents can do to be a little bit more proactive on setting appropriate guidelines. Certainly, parents can have discussions with their teenagers about how are you using social media? What do you think about it? And just, not in a negative way, but in a positive way, to encourage them to be able to recognize what's going on with social media and to encourage appropriate behaviors. And teachers can do the same thing in the classroom by reinforcing these issues as well.
That's really great recommendation, and to the high school teachers as well. I know kind of a big mindset for high school teachers. If you teach a subject that is, math, science, things like that, sometimes you might not feel that there's time in class to have these types of discussions. But I would really recommend that you kind of observe that mindset and decide whether that's actually serving you and your students or not. I know, there's a really intense chemistry curriculum you need to get through. But if your chemistry students aren't able to study and get their homework done because they're stuck on social media, then it is worth taking a pause, talking about these things in class, even taking 30 minutes of a class to have this discussion, talk about strategies. And then you might start seeing your lab reports come in more on time, or those students that are struggling having a bit more success because you've given them strategies. Just like we think, it's important to teach study habits, these types of discussions, these types of skills that we can teach our kids in, the world is evolving. These are things that we have to teach to help them be good students as well.
Yeah,
so it's worth taking that time.
I agree with you, and don't be surprised if you set aside a short period of time to talk about this issue. Don't be surprised if at some point a teenage girl, because this is really affecting teenage girls' self-image. Don't be surprised if a teenage girl comes up to you privately at some point and says, this is what I've been doing, and this is how, I feel horrible about this, and sort of opens up to you because you took the time in a classroom to bring up this topic and talk about it, even if it's just to cite the statistics that I did and ask the class what they think about it. You may find a young girl who relates to that and later comes up and talks to you about how social media is affecting them. And if that happens, you have touched a child in a way that might actually make a significant difference. So it's not just the group discussion that you can have. Maybe you do it once a semester or so, but you open that up to allow a child to sort of tune into what you're saying, and they may respond to you in ways that might be surprising. It may really have an impact. I think the child is going to walk away thinking, here's a teacher who understands what I'm going through when I'm on TikTok, that I don't feel good about myself. This is a teacher that recognizes what it's doing. So don't underestimate the power of being able to have that kind of impact.
That's great. So you've given some really great information and things for us teachers to think about. We've got some strategies we can work with. I think this has been a really awesome interview that our listeners are going to walk away with a lot of useful ideas to take back into their classrooms. So if our listeners would like to connect with you further, check out your book, where can they find you?
I would say go to the website. You can check out the book, helptheaddictedchild.com. You can read the blog articles. I have a blog article on how the pandemic has affected drug use among teens. I have a blog article on the mental health issues of teens. And there's also a link where you can send me a message or ask me a question or send me a note if you have a question. There's also a link that will take you to Amazon if you'd like to order the book. It's available as a Kindle. It's also available as a paperback. And the website is helptheaddictedchild.com. So, please check it out, read the blog articles. And if you'd like to order a book, it's available as a Kindle or a paperback.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time, Richard.
Oh, thank you. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to me and for participating in our discussion, which I hope all of the teachers and everybody else finds informative and interesting. So thank you so much.
Awesome. All right. I hope you took some excellent takeaways from this episode. All right, the things that I couldn't remember the names of. First one was the discussion board. It's called Jamboard. It's the Google Jamboard. So I've linked to that in the show notes for you, or you can just Google it. You'll be able to find it. And that Netflix documentary about social media is called The Social Dilemma. All right, so for links to everything that we mentioned in this episode, check out our show notes at educalm.com/TBE157. So again, that's educalm.com. That's spelled EDUCALME.com/TBE as in the Balanced Educator 157. Now, if you would like to get your hands on our free resources for social emotional learning and mindfulness in the classroom, go to educalm.com/welcome. We have all of our freebies there. Again, that's educalm.com/welcome. Thank you so much for sharing your time with us. We appreciate you and the work that you're doing in the world so much. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with someone that you think would get value from it too. All right, take care.